So I guess Rockstar Games had a little free time on their hands while they're developing Grand Theft Auto 6 because they've come out with a Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced Edition. And with this Enhanced Edition, we're getting some ray tracing support. They're also giving support for upscaling for FSR1, FSR3, and NVIDIA DLSS3. We are going to be testing this game using an Intel Arc B580. Unfortunately, it does not come with support for XeSS, so we will not be testing upscaling in this video. It also gives fast load times when using an SSD or an NVMe drive. There is enhanced support for higher resolutions, higher aspect ratios, and higher frame rates. That's one thing that we will be looking at because higher frame rates in the original version did cause some issues. We have dual sense controller support, and there's also enhanced audio with support for Dolby Atmos and improved fidelity of speech, cinematics, and music. Along with these enhancements also come with higher hardware requirements. So the minimum hardware requirements for the enhanced version is quite a step up from what would have been available back in 2013 when this game first came out. But it's still pretty low, so the majority of people still should not have a difficult time playing the advanced version to get some of those enhancements. They're asking for an Intel Core i7 4770 and a GTX 1630 or an RX 6400. Both of those GPUs are pretty low on scale. There are a lot of integrated graphics in like a 5600G that are probably comparable to this kind of performance that you'd be able to use to play this game. However, the recommended hardware is a little bit of a step up from the minimums required and from what would have been required for the legacy game. So they're saying you need, for recommended settings, an i5 9600K or a Ryzen 5 3600. And again, these CPUs would have came out roughly 4 or 5 years ago. And the video card that they recommend is an RTX 3060 or an RX 6600 XT. Now, those two GPUs are no slouch. They are still really good GPUs for running today's games. So it does have fairly demanding hardware requirements for the recommended, but those are pretty popular GPUs, and it's nothing too extraordinary. Again, most of this hardware came out about 4 or 5 years ago. So let's jump in and see how well the new enhanced version performs versus the legacy version and how some of them look, especially around ray tracing. So starting off at 1440p with everything set to very high, or essentially the highest that it can go. With the Intel Arc B580, we are not getting a very good performance because it just can't handle here after reset. I guess the original game just doesn't handle high FPS very well, and you get a lot of stuttering. Hence why the 1% low is 3, and you're getting these massive spikes. We're seeing quite a bit better performance in the enhanced version. We're sitting at around the average for 110 FPS for the average, which is lower than what we're seeing in the legacy version. However, the 1% low is substantially higher. Instead of being single digits, we're sitting at 39. Look at the frame time graph. You can see spikes here and there come by. That's causing this lower 1% low. However, it's not causing any issues while gaming. I'm not seeing any stuttering or anything like that. However, it still appears to have an issue with high FPS due to the low 1% lows that we're seeing. And if I turn the graphic settings up, let's go to 1440p. So even at 1440p, where the average FPS has dipped a little bit, we're still seeing pretty low 1% lows. It's actually fairly similar to what we're seeing at 1080p. but still less than half of the average FPS. The reason why I'm kind of pointing this out is that even at 1080p, 1440p, let's try 4K, and then I'll show you what happens when we turn ray tracing on. And then with 4K, the average drops quite a bit. We're now down to around 55, 54 FPS with the 1% low at 28. And looking at the frame time graph, it's still spiking here and there. I'm not seeing any stuttering, so it's still fair. Oh, that's great. Still fairly smooth to play, even with the fairly low 1% low. But it's manageable. There's no stuttering that I've noticed. But still, I would have expected the 1% load to be a little bit higher. Now, here's where it's going to get a little interesting. So keep in mind with 1080p, we're seeing the 1% low of around, I think it was 40. So let's go back to 1080p. We're going to turn ray tracing on. Now back to 1080p, ray tracing on. Of course, the average is going to drop just because ray tracing does give a performance hit to the FPS. But we're still seeing pretty decent average. But the 1% low is substantially higher. It's over double what we were seeing with just 1080p, no ray tracing on. And looking at the frame time graph, everything is fairly smooth. So I'm not sure if it's still the same issue that we're seeing with the legacy game where it can't handle high FPS gaming very well, but we're still seeing with ray tracing on, still having fairly high FPS, and we're getting really good 1% low versus not having ray tracing on. So it's just interesting to see. So now that we tested out how well the game handles high FPS, let's see what performance we can get at 1440p. With very high settings, and then with very high ray tracing and maximum ray tracing. And so far, with very high, the very high settings of 1440p, we're pretty much seeing the same results. We have pretty good 1%, or we have pretty good average FPS at 129. However, the 1% low is down again at around 39 FPS, which is pretty low. You can see the spikes in the frame time graph, pretty much all over the place, but the game is still running relatively smoothly. I don't see any stuttering. It's just we have some pretty poor 1% low. So let's see if ray tracing gets rid of that again. Alright, so with very high ray tracing, yeah, it's pretty much stabilized the 1% low. So the average dropped quite a bit. So we went from around 120 down to 71 FPS average. But the 1% low is not much lower than that at 60 FPS. So again, for some reason, ray tracing helps stabilize that 1% low and bring it up higher than what we would get without ray tracing on. Do see the occasional spike on the frame time graph, but nothing compared to what we were seeing before, and it's still getting really good performance at 1440p with over 60 FPS. So let's turn the max ray tracing on. Alright, going from a very high to maximum drops the FPS from 70 down to 48. So we do lose quite a bit of performance. But the 1% low is still relatively stable. It did drop a little bit, but we're at 40 FPS for the 1% low, which is only slightly below the 46 average that we're seeing. So we're not going to be seeing any large spikes in the frame time graph. There shouldn't be any stuttering. Even though we're only getting 40 FPS, it's still pretty smooth to play. So just like every game, ray tracing does incur a performance hit on the average, but oddly enough, for this game, it helps stabilize the 1% low and actually gives you a little bit better of an experience playing the game, because instead of having the your FPS swing from an average of 140 down to a 1% low of 40, it brings it closer together, especially with only the very high ray tracing on. You're going to get between 70 and 60 FPS, which is a lot smoother to play. All right, so we're in the enhanced version of Grand Theft Auto 5. We're going to check the different detail with ray tracing. So right now, ray tracing is turned off. We just have the very high graphic preset turned on, and the resolution is set to 4K. And as you can see, we have a shadow coming from like the post, the canopy here at the gas station, and these lampposts. We have some shadowing there. Let's go and turn ray tracing on. So with very high ray tracing, it seems like everything just got a lot softer. The shadows aren't as dark, especially those lampposts. There's very little shadow there. So nothing too crazy of a difference between the very high ray tracing on. Just got a lot softer. And then with max ray tracing, a lot of the shadows just completely disappeared. The canopy has a little bit, some on that Coke machine, but a lot of the shadows kind of disappeared. So I haven't been overly impressed with like the ray traced lighting and shadowing. So let's take a look here. No ray tracing's turned on. I don't have really any shadows in here. We got some shadows coming in from the curtains over here. Turn ray tracing on. And just looking at that, I don't see really any difference. Yeah, shadowing doesn't show very much difference. Like the reflection side of ray tracing has showed a lot of promise, but shadowing from looking at the gas station and then looking what's going on here, there's just not a whole lot of difference. All right, so taking a look at how reflections work with ray tracing off versus turned on. Right now it's turned off, 4K, very high settings, and as you can see, there's kind of looks weird walking back and forth. The reflection in this for those steps behind us do not look very, they move very weird. And as you can tell, I am not in the reflection at all. So let's go and turn ray tracing on. So we'll move it up to very high ray tracing. That looks a lot better. That makes a huge difference having ray tracing on. The steps are further away. They actually they interact normally as you would expect. You can actually see my reflection. And I can't tell. I think those, yeah, those lights that are inside on the other side of those windows. Ray tracing does make a big difference with reflections. Does make a difference when we turn it up to maximum. All right, maximum ray tracing. I don't see much difference between very high ray tracing and ray trace maximum. Just looking off the from what I'm seeing here. But yeah, that definitely makes a big difference having ray tracing turned off for reflections. So it didn't really talk too much about the image enhancements that would have happened between the original version and now the enhanced version. So we're going to take a look at a couple of screenshots that I have here. Starting off first, we'll look for the textures on, like in this case, a brick wall and a sidewalk. And in this case, I really don't see much of a difference. Ignore the coloring just because the sun was starting to go down in the game when I did the enhanced version versus the original. So ignore the color, just focus on seeing any of the texture detail on the bricks or on the concrete that he's walking on. And personally, I don't see much difference from this angle and this point of view. I just don't see any real difference. The guardrails look almost the same. The brick walls, I don't see any additional textures. So I don't think they made any changes to that. At least not any obvious changes. Now here we start to see a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit additional foliage. Looking at the shrubs, there's a little extra detail. The short grass doesn't have much difference to it. It's mainly within the shrubs, and there's a little extra detail in, I find, the rock face. But overall, in this image, the overall detail isn't much difference. There is just a little bit better sharpness in the foliage. Now, in this picture, you actually start to see a lot of difference within the grass. Looking at the enhanced version, if you look off in the distance, you actually see a lot more texture in the grass. You can see a lot more of it sticking up, where in the original version, the grass doesn't really pop out. It just kind of looks flat with a little bit of coloring difference. And then when you look near to where he's standing, there's additional detail in the grass. You see a lot more like yellow grass poking up through the green versus where it kind of all blends in together on the original version. I didn't see too much difference in the palm tree. There is a little bit extra detail, but looking at the tree, there's a lot more texture within the tree on the leaves. You can actually look at the leaves and see, you can almost count every leaf on the tree versus on the original. Everything kind of blends together. There's still detail there, just not as much as looking at the enhanced version. So overall, I would say from a visual perspective, the enhanced version is quite nice, especially since this is free. And they also have you can port over your saved games from the original. So as long as your hardware can handle the extra load, the extra demand that this game requires, I can't see why you wouldn't want to upgrade to the enhanced version just to get, in this case, you get better detail. Not so much on the buildings and the brick that we looked at, but as far as like trees and the foliage and stuff like that, it does look a lot better. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other changes. It's just really difficult to go through everything. You'll probably notice when playing the game that there's going to be other things that look quite a bit better.